My name is Alara Quinn, I'm 32, and for most of my life I believed two things without question. 1. Family comes first. 2. I exist to keep the peace. I didn't realize how deeply those beliefs had been hammered into me until the day they shattered, loudly, violently, and right in the middle of my own driveway. It happened on a Thursday in late May, one of those warm South Carolina mornings where the sky looks almost too blue, too calm, like it's mocking you. I had just stepped out of a coffee shop near my office in Beaufort when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen was my neighbor Margot Elliston, a retired nurse with sharp instincts and an even sharper tongue. She never called unless something was seriously wrong. When I picked up, she didn't even say hello. "Alara, sweetheart, there's a moving truck in your driveway." I froze mid-step. "A what?" "A moving truck," she repeated, her voice tight. "And your family is here. Your mother, your sister, those boys of hers. They're carrying boxes into your house." For a moment the sound around me faded. The traffic, the chatter, the hiss of the espresso machine behind me. It all fell away as if someone had plunged my head underwater. I laughed instinctively. A small, brittle laugh. "Margot, that has to be a mistake. Maybe they're dropping something off." "No, honey. They're moving in." My vision blurred so suddenly it felt like heat stroke. Moving in? To my house. The house I had spent nearly a decade clawing my way toward? I didn't remember hanging up. I only remembered finding myself in my car, speeding toward St. Helena Island, hands shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel with both fists. Every mile closer I got, the knot in my stomach pulled tighter, until it felt like a fist squeezing my lungs. And then I turned onto my street. There was the U-Haul. Huge. Orange. Loud. Parked in my driveway like a declaration of war. And there they were, my mother Lydia standing on my front steps barking orders like a drill sergeant. My sister Rowan lounging against a box-marked kitchen as if she'd just gotten off a long flight instead of a 45-minute drive. And her two boys sprinting around my yard dragging mud through the grass I'd spent months coaxing back to life. I parked crookedly, barely remembering to turn off the engine. When I stepped out, my legs felt unsteady, like the ground itself had stopped being solid. My mother spotted me instantly, lifting her hand in a casual wave. Like she was greeting me at a Sunday cookout, not actively hijacking my home. "Oh good, you're early," she called. "Help Rowan with that box. It's her dishes." Her dishes. Not my dishes. Not my home. Not my life. Just theirs. Automatically. By default. I walked closer, each step feeling heavier than the one before. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out thinner than I intended. "What's going on?" She frowned at me with exaggerated confusion, then gestured at the truck. "What do you mean?" "We're moving in." Just like that. As if announcing the weather. My sister dropped her box onto the porch with a thud loud enough to rattle my teeth. "It's a family property, Alara. Mom helped you with the down payment, remember? Which makes it ours too." Ours. A word I had come to despise. I swallowed hard. They were standing in front of something I had fought tooth and bone for. A 2-bedroom Marshview cottage I had bought 3 years earlier. My first real home, paid for with overtime hours, missed holidays, and more sacrifices than I could count. Every plank of its weathered wood felt like part of my spine. "Family shares," my mother added, waving a dismissive hand. "And Rowan and the boys need space. Your place is half empty most of the time anyway." I stared at her. At all of them. At the moving truck already half unloaded. And something inside me, something that had been stretched and tugged for decades, finally snapped. "This is my house," I whispered, my hands trembling. "Whine." My mother rolled her eyes so hard I could practically hear it. "Oh sweetheart, don't start. We don't have time for one of your episodes. The truck needs to be unloaded by 5. One of my episodes. That was what she always called it whenever I tried, honestly tried, to have a boundary. Whenever I said no. Whenever I dared to act like a separate human instead of a family utility tool. The boys barreled past me, laughing, coated in sand and God knows what else. Rowan didn't even look apologetic. I looked at the boxes stacked on my porch, the toys strewn across my lawn, the smug certainty on my sister's face, and something new rose in me. Not fear. Not guilt. Not resignation. Resolve. Cold, clean, undeniable. I straightened, my voice steady for the first time in years. "Everyone stop. Right now." My mother froze mid-step, annoyance flashing across her face. "Alara, don't make a scene. But the scene was already happening. They just weren't ready for it to be mine. I took a breath that felt like breaking surface after drowning. I'm going inside, I said. And when I come back out, all of this needs to be gone. He actually laughed. Oh honey, you'll adjust. Oh, I wouldn't. I walked past them, unlocked my front door, stepped inside and shut it firmly behind me. For the first time in my life, I locked a door against my own family. And then, hands still shaking, I reached for my phone. Because if they wanted a war over my life, my home and my sanity, I was finally ready to fight back. If you had met me a year ago, you probably wouldn't have recognized the woman who locked her own family out of her house. Back then I was predictable, reliable. The one who smoothed things over, picked up slack, paid the bill, apologized first, apologized last, apologized for things I didn't even do. I was raised, trained really, to be the emotional shock absorber of my family. And like all well-trained things, I didn't question it. Not until it nearly destroyed me. I grew up in a small town outside Savannah, in a house where the air always smelled like lemon cleaner and suppressed resentment. My mother, Lydia, was a master at turning guilt into a weapon so sharp you didn't realize you were bleeding until you were already weak. If she wanted something done, she didn't ask. She sighed. Long, meaningful sighs that carried the weight of martyrdom in them. And I learned early. If I didn't fix whatever she was sighing about, I was the problem. My father, Julian, wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there. Physically he existed, sitting in his recliner, working his woodworking hobby, watching Braves games with monastic devotion, but emotionally, he was like a houseplant that occasionally paid bills. Then there was my sister, Rowan. 3 years older. 3 times as dramatic. And somehow, according to my mother, 3 times as fragile. Rowan has always needed more support, Mom used to say. She's sensitive. Sensitive was a polite way of saying irresponsible, chaotic, self-centered, and perfectly comfortable letting the world take care of her. But in our family, sensitive meant someone else, usually me, had to absorb the fallout. And I did. Every single time. When Rowan dropped out of community college after a semester, she moved back home. When she got pregnant at 23, my parents applauded her courage. When the father vanished, they said Rowan was too sweet for cruel men. When she got pregnant again by someone else 2 years later, they insisted she was just unlucky. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs through college. Graduated early. Started climbing the corporate ladder like my life depended on it. And yet somehow I was always the one who didn't understand family struggles. The irony could have filled a stadium. By the time I was 27, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small coastal cottage. Not beachfront, marsh view, weathered siding, a porch that creaked when the humidity was high. But it was mine. Mine in a way nothing had ever been before. My mother gave me $2,500 toward it. A gift, she said. A little encouragement. But here's the thing about gifts in my family. They come with invisible strings that tighten the moment you try to breathe. The first time Mom visited, she walked through my house like a realtor showing a property she planned to sell. She opened cabinets, checked the linen closet, critiqued the paint color. Then she said the words that still haunt me for how casually she delivered them. It's a lot of space for one person. I should have seen the warning then. But I wanted her approval too much to question it. Looking back, I think they had been circling my home like vultures long before the moving truck arrived. Over the next few years, the pattern continued. Blair, Rowan needs to borrow your car. Her check engine light came on again. Translation: her unpaid parking tickets finally caught up to her. Alara, can you watch the boys this weekend? Rowan needs a break. Translation: Rowan was going to a music festival. Alara, your sister is struggling. You're doing so well. Can't you help just a little? Translation: open your wallet. And every time, every single time, the unspoken ending was the same. Because you owe us. I owed them for being born. For having a job. For not needing rescuing every other Tuesday. And the more capable I became, the more they took. Because capability, in their eyes, was just another resource they believed they owned. So when that moving truck appeared, when they marched into my life and my house as if I had been storing it for them all along, it wasn't sudden. It was the crescendo of a lifelong performance. I wasn't shocked, not really. Not the way a normal person might be. What I felt was something else. Recognition. Like seeing the final puzzle piece slide into place, confirming what I had spent decades trying not to believe. My family didn't love me for who I was. They valued me for what I provided. Support. Money. Time. Stability. Silence. Especially silence. I was the quiet one, the helper, the responsible one, the one who would never make a fuss. The perfect victim. Until that day. Until I finally said no. Until I closed the door. Until I turned the lock. I didn't know it then, but that click of the deadbolt was the beginning of my entire life shifting on its axis. It was the sound of the roll breaking. And the woman who stepped forward to take its place? She wasn't going to be quiet anymore. Before the fight started, before the police, the lawyers, the restraining orders, there was the house. My house. The one thing in my life that wasn't handed to me with strings attached or taken from me under the guise of family needs. And for you to understand why I fought so hard, you need to understand what it cost me to get it. I was 24 when I first saw the place. Back then, the cottage wasn't the cozy marsh view retreat it is now. It was, well, a wreck. The siding was peeling, the porch listing slightly to the right, and the interior had a smell that suggested several decades of poor decisions. But the moment I stepped inside, standing in that slanted living room with afternoon light spilling across the beaten hardwood floors, I felt it. A pull. A promise. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in my life, I envisioned a space that was entirely mine. No shared room. No tiptoeing around Rowan's tantrums. No hearing my mother's heels clicking down the hallway like a metronome of obligation. Just quiet. A place for me. So I decided then and there I would buy it. Problem was, deciding is the easy part. Paying for it. That's where the trouble begins. I took every overtime shift my job at the logistics firm would allow. Sometimes I'd roll in at 7 a.m. and wouldn't see the outside world again until 10 at night. I ate dollar ramen, skipped vacations, said no to every social invitation that cost more than gas money. I patched my car with duct tape more times than I'm proud of. But the dream of that house pulled me through every miserable sleep-deprived day. Meanwhile, Rowan, my beloved sister, was living rent-free in our parents' guest room, insisting she was in between things again, which in her vocabulary meant working part-time at a boutique and quitting whenever the manager asked her to come in on time. And my parents, they saw nothing wrong with that. But me, the daughter who never asked for anything, they questioned my every step. Are you sure buying a house is smart, Elara? Mom asked one night over dinner. It's such a big responsibility, Dad added. You should be helping Rowan with the boys more, Mom continued. She needs you. They said all of this while I was working 60-hour weeks. The irony still makes my teeth grit. The down payment took me 3 years. 3 years of grinding and climbing and scraping by. When I finally had enough, I told my parents. They blinked at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. My mother pressed her lips together. Well, we suppose we can contribute something, she said after a moment. Then she pulled out her checkbook and wrote $2,500. Consider it a loan for the family's future, she said. A loan? That was not what she called it later. Later she called it ownership. But in that moment, starved for approval, I didn't argue. And that tiny amount, the one I could have earned in 1 extra month of overtime, would become the rope she tried to strangle me with. When the mortgage papers were finally signed and I received the keys, I sat alone in the empty living room, staring at the walls that leaned just slightly inward, and I cried. Not because I was overwhelmed. Not because I was scared. But because, for the first time, I owned something no one else could take from me. Or so I thought. The renovation took another year. I learned how to patch drywall, how to sand floors, how to unclog pipes without panicking. I painted every room myself, blistering my hands and staining half my wardrobe in the process. Rowan visited once, walked through the house like she was previewing an Airbnb she didn't plan to pay for, and said, "It's cute. Small. But cute." Mom came another time and asked, "Why did you paint the kitchen that color? It'll make the house harder to sell." They didn't see the sanctuary I was building. They saw an asset. A resource. A possession waiting to be absorbed by the collective. I should have realized then what I was up against. But I shrugged off the comments because the house felt good in a way nothing ever had. It was the one part of my life where I didn't feel small. And that sense of ownership, of finally having something for myself, terrified my family. Not consciously, maybe. But deep down they sensed the power shift. A woman with her own home isn't easy to control. A woman with boundaries is dangerous. A woman who can stand on her own 2 feet might one day choose to walk away. And the day they saw that possibility, the day they realized I had something solid they couldn't shake loose, was the day they began planning how to take it. I didn't know that back then, sitting on my newly painted porch, sipping cheap wine out of a mason jar while the marsh cicadas buzzed around me. I didn't know I was building the battleground for the biggest war of my life. All I knew was that for the first time I wasn't building a home for someone else. I was building one for me. And that alone was enough to make them furious. I just hadn't seen the storm clouds yet. But they were coming. And they were coming fast. If you've ever lived your whole life bending to other people's needs, you develop a strange superpower. You can sense tension long before it breaks the surface. You hear it in pauses. You feel it in glances. You notice it in the way someone's tone shifts half a degree colder. And yet here's the paradox. You learn to ignore every red flag your intuition screams at you. Because acknowledging them means acknowledging the truth. That the people who claim to love you don't actually want what's best for you. I wasn't ready to face that truth. Not yet. So when the first warning signs came, I tucked them neatly into my mental drawer labeled, "Be a good daughter." A drawer I should have burned years ago. It started small. During a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, bland meatloaf, overcooked green beans, the usual. Rowan looked up from her phone and said, "Must be nice living near the water. The boys would love that." My mom didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Her silence was a pressure valve tightening in the room. I laughed weakly. "They're welcome anytime." Mom gave a tight smile. "Oh, I'm sure they'd love to spend more time there. But you're always so private about the place." Private. A word she said like an accusation. Dad cleared his throat in a way that meant he agreed. He always agreed, with the louder voice in the room, and that voice was never mine. Rowan smirked into her mashed potatoes. "I mean, it's not like she actually uses both bedrooms." I felt something pinch under my ribs. "Rowan, I bought the house for myself. I like having space." He shrugged. "Well, some of us don't have that luxury." Yes. The script she had perfected. Rowan was the struggling single mother. The delicate one. The one whose own decisions were everyone else's responsibility. Mom jumped in right on cue. "Alara, sweetheart, it does seem a bit selfish to let all that space sit empty when your family is squeezing into one room." Their house had 4 bedrooms. Rowan's boys had taken over the entire den, yes, but not because of lack of space. Because my sister refused to put them in the upstairs bedrooms since the lighting wasn't good for her TikTok lives. But facts had never mattered in my family's emotional economy. Only guilt did. Over the next few weeks, the comments kept coming. Subtle. Needling. Weaponized. Well, it's important to think about how your choices affect the family. Dad. Your sister is trying her best, you know. Rowan. I swear if I had my own place, even half as nice as yours, I'd let you visit whenever you wanted. That last one stung. Because she knew I wouldn't call it out. And she was right. I didn't. I smiled. I swallowed it. I carried it home like a weight in my chest. Because that's what I'd always done. Then came the more direct signals. The ones I couldn't file away so easily. One afternoon, Rowan texted me. "Mom says your couch could fit a sleeper pull-out." Just thinking out loud. I ignored it. A day later. "Do you care if the boys keep some toys at your place? Just in case we want to stay the weekend." I responded. "Rowan, no one asked me about weekends." Her reply was instant. "Wow. Hey. Forget I asked." I stared at those words so long they burned into my vision. Forget I asked. A phrase she'd used my entire life. A verbal dagger wrapped in fake innocence. But the question wasn't the dagger. The assumption was. She wasn't wondering whether they could use my home. She was preparing me for the idea that they already would. The next warning came from someone I least expected. My Uncle Gerald. He's the only relative on my mother's side with actual backbone. A quiet man who ran an auto shop and avoided drama like it carried disease. One evening he called me, a rare event in itself. "Ilara," he said in his low gravelly tone, "your mother mentioned something at dinner. I thought you should know." My blood chilled. What did she say? She said she's been thinking about how family should consolidate housing. That Rowan needs a fresh start. That your place is big enough for all of them. My heart pounded. "And then," he added slowly, "she said you wouldn't be difficult about it because you're the reasonable one." Reasonable. That word again. Meaning, compliant. Meaning, silent. Meaning, easily sacrificed. I closed my eyes. She didn't ask me, I whispered. Yeah, he said, that's what worried me. When we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the old cedar beams above my head. The ones I had sanded myself for 4 weekends straight. And in that moment I understood, deeply with a clarity that hurt, that my family wasn't fantasizing. They were planning, plotting, strategizing, imagining my home as a convenient solution to problems they had created. And I was the variable they expected to fold neatly into place. The good daughter. The easy one. The one who never fought back. The one who could always be counted on to give more than she had. But here's the thing about people like me. We don't break loud. We break quietly. Quietly, until one day the quiet stops being soft. It becomes sharp. Dangerous. It becomes a no we finally mean. And when that no arrives, people who relied on our silence will swear it came out of nowhere. But the truth? It was building long before the moving truck ever touched my driveway. I wish I could tell you that when the moving truck appeared in my driveway, I reacted with calm logic. That I handled the moment gracefully, rationally, like someone practiced in self-respect and boundaries. But the truth is simpler, Messier. My mind went silent. My body went cold. My entire life, every compromise, every swallowed no, collapsed into one single thought. Not this. Not my home. I had expected trouble someday, yes. But not a full-scale takeover. Not without a warning. Not with a truck. Not like this. When I opened the door and stepped inside my cottage, the little sanctuary I had built with blistered hands and empty bank accounts, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since childhood. Fear. Not of violence, but of loss. My mother's voice was muffled outside, shouting instructions. Rowan's boys were still thudding across my porch like wild animals. The entire house vibrated with trespass. I leaned against the door, breathing hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion. An organized one. And it hit me then with a clarity I wish I hadn't needed. They thought I'd just accept it. Of course they did. Because I always accepted everything. My hands shook as I dialed the locksmith. I barely registered my own voice as I explained that I needed every lock replaced as soon as possible. Today? The man repeated, skeptical. Yes, I said. Today. I didn't care what it cost. I didn't care if I sounded frantic. He told me he could come the next morning. I took the appointment. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I called the non-emergency line for the sheriff's office. A calm woman answered. Charleston County Sheriff's Department. What's your emergency? It's not, well, I don't know, I said, stumbling. My family is trying to move into my house without permission. There was a pause. Not disbelief, just assessment. Are they inside the home? She asked. No, I said. Not yet. They're on the porch. They brought a moving truck. I heard her typing. I heard the steadiness in her voice. It anchored me. Okay, ma'am. Here's what you need to know. If they enter without your consent, that becomes a trespassing issue. If they attempt to establish residency, it becomes more complicated. I strongly advise you to keep them outside. Do you feel unsafe? Unsafe? Emotionally? Yes. Physically? Not exactly. Terrified? Completely. But I simply said, no. I just need help. She assured me officers could respond if things escalated. I thanked her and hung up. Then I walked to the living room window. Outside, my mother was banging on my door. Alara, she yelled. Open up. You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. Classic Lydia Quinn vocabulary. Behind her, Rowan rolled her eyes dramatically. She always does this, Rowan said loudly. Always has to make everything about herself. The words stung. Not because they were new, but because I had spent my entire adulthood ensuring things weren't about me. I stepped away from the window before they could see me. I didn't open the door. I didn't try to negotiate. Instead, I stood in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by furniture I had chosen, walls I had painted, floorboards I had refinished, and I whispered. No more. They stayed outside for nearly half an hour. I didn't answer. Didn't react. Didn't open the door even once. Eventually their knocking stopped. Then I heard footsteps. Movement. The truck's ramp clanging. Were they giving up? Leaving? I peeked out the curtain. No. They were unloading again. Boxes on the porch. Bags on the steps. My mother directing, Rowan complaining, the kids running circles in my yard. They were doubling down. My heart thudded painfully. Because suddenly I understood. They thought ignoring me was the path of least resistance. They thought the situation would resolve itself if they pretended my no wasn't real. They thought I'd come outside eventually, tired, defeated, ready to compromise. Compromise. Another word that, in my family, meant Alara gives in. But that version of me was dying. Rapidly. I need you all to stop. I said loudly through the closed door. Everything went silent. For a moment even the birds seemed to pause. Then my mother snapped back. Alara, we don't have time for this little tantrum. The truck is due back by 6. There was. The label she'd used my entire life. Tantrum. Translation. Any boundary Alara sets that inconveniences us. I gripped the doorknob, pressing my forehead against the cool wood. I could feel my breath shaking. I could feel 32 years of suppression rising like a storm tide. I didn't open the door. I didn't dignify her comment with a response. Instead, I walked deeper into my house, grabbed my folder of important documents and laid them on the kitchen table. The deed. The mortgage statement. The utility bills. Proof. Real legal proof. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't going to let my family rewrite history in real time. I wasn't going to let them tell me what was mine or who I was. I wasn't going to let them steamroll me with guilt, obligation, or shared DNA. I was going to fight. And it started with one simple truth. If they wanted to take my home, they'd have to go through the law. Not through me silently backing down. 3 days. That's how long it took for everything to build toward the showdown. 3 days of silence from me. And increasing desperation from them. 3 days until Saturday. The day they planned to officially move in. Except this time, I would be ready. And they would learn in the most public, undeniable way possible. I wasn't the same Alara they'd been using for years. Not anymore. In movies, the moment before a battle is quiet. In real life, my real life, the 3 days leading up to Saturday were anything but quiet. They were buzzing, vibrating, simmering with a tension so thick it felt like humidity in my lungs. I barely slept. I barely ate. I barely recognized myself. Because for the first time in my 32 years, I wasn't doing what my family expected of me. And they didn't know how to handle that. Mom called me 14 times the first day. I ignored them. Rowan called me 22. I blocked them both. Then the unknown number started. Friends of my mother. Some distant cousin I hadn't seen since I was 8. A neighbor from my parents' street who somehow thought she had the right to weigh in. Every message said the same thing in different tones. Be reasonable. Don't make this a big deal. Family sticks together. Your sister needs this. It's just temporary. Temporary. A word they all use like an anesthetic. Temporary in my family meant forever. And forever meant the end of my life as I knew it. So I blocked every new number that came. And then on Thursday a text arrived from my father. Only one sentence. This isn't how we raised you. Funny how he suddenly remembered the concept of raising. He'd been emotionally checked out of fatherhood by the time I was 10. But that text, it hurt. More than I wanted to admit. Because it didn't sound angry. Sounded disappointed. The exact tone guaranteed to break me open. Except this time I didn't crumble. I simply blocked him too. And for the first time in years silence fell over my phone. It was terrifying. It was liberating. It was mine. On Friday the pressure escalated. Rowan sent a message from a friend's number. A long, dramatic monologue about how the boys were heartbroken, that their aunt didn't care about them. As if 5- and 7-year-olds were lying awake at night contemplating property rights. Then she added, "We already told them we're moving to the island. Don't make a liar out of me." I stared at those words stunned. Not because they surprised me, at this point nothing did, but because it confirmed the truth. She hadn't considered my feelings. She hadn't considered my life. She hadn't even considered asking. She just announced the plan. Claimed the dream. Signed me the supporting role. And she expected reality to rearrange itself around her fantasy. But this time it wouldn't. That afternoon I left work early claiming I wasn't feeling well. Which wasn't a lie. Anxiety had settled into my bones like chilled seawater. I stocked my kitchen. Checked every window twice. Laid out my documents on the dining table in a neat row. Deed. Mortgage. Difference. Bank statements. Proof I existed. Proof I mattered. Proof that what was mine was mine. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, preparing evidence against your own family. A heartbreak that doesn't bleed outward. It bleeds inward. Friday night, just after sunset, my father's truck rolled into my driveway. I hadn't expected him. And for a moment a tiny part of me hoped that maybe he was coming to make peace. Maybe to understand. So I didn't ignore the knock. I walked to the door. But I didn't open it. "Ilara," he said through the wood, "this is getting out of hand." I closed my eyes. "Dad," I said softly, "you can't come in." He sighed. A long, exhausted sound. "You're making your mother sick over this. Rowan is overwhelmed. The boys are confused." "They're confused," I shot back, "because Rowan told them they were moving into a house she doesn't own." He ignored that. "You need to be flexible. Your sister is in a tough spot. She needs stability. She needs to get a job," I said. "She needs accountability. You and Mom have protected her from consequences for years." "Ilara," he said sharply, "that's enough." There was the unspoken rule of our family. You can call Rowan irresponsible. You can call Rowan dramatic. But you cannot call Rowan accountable. He let silence hang a while, then delivered the killing blow. "Your grandmother helped you buy that house because she believed in family. She would be ashamed of you." The words hit like an open palm to the face. A low, cold burn spread across my chest. My grandmother had adored me, truly unlike the conditional affection of my parents. And using her memory as a weapon? That crossed a line so deep I felt it split something inside me. "Leave," I said, voice shaking. "Ilara. Leave." This time I didn't whisper it. I commanded it. I watched his shadow pause behind the frosted glass. Then I heard footsteps. His truck door. The engine. And then he was gone. I locked the door again even though it was already locked. Even though I knew that wasn't the danger anymore. The danger was blood deep, emotional, familiar. A danger I had lived with my whole life. Saturday arrived like waking inside a nightmare you already knew the ending to. My body felt electric, wired, tense, hovering between fear and fury. I dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Pulled my hair back. Sat at the dining table with my documents. And waited. At 9:30 a.m., exactly as planned, I heard the rumble of a moving truck coming down the road. Followed by my mother's car. Then my father's truck. They were coming. And this time they weren't coming quietly. My pulse pounded in my ears. Because today I wasn't going to hide behind a door. I was going to fight openly. Legally. Publicly. Finally. And when the first fist hit my front door. When my mother's voice screeched my name like a battle cry. I took a slow breath. Dialed the number on speed dial. And said the words I never imagined I'd say about the people who raised me. "Hi. I need to report trespassing." This was no longer a family disagreement. This was war. I heard the police sirens before I saw the blue lights reflecting across my living room walls. They were faint at first, distant like an echo rolling over the marsh. But as they grew louder, cutting through the morning air, something inside me shifted. Relief. Fear. Vindication. All tangled together. Because once those officers stepped onto my porch, there would be no pretending anymore. No glossing over the situation as a misunderstanding. No rewriting the narrative to paint me as dramatic, ungrateful, or selfish. The truth was about to be spoken. Not by me, not by them, but by the law. And my family had no idea what was coming. Through the window I watched the two cruisers pull up behind the moving truck. My mother spun toward them, hands already flying into the air in a dramatic display of maternal distress. Rowan, standing beside her, looked enraged, jaw clenched, cheeks flushed, like someone had just snatched away the last lifeline she thought she deserved. My father stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. The shame had a posture, it was his. The officers stepped out. One tall and sandy-haired, probably mid-30s. Another shorter, older, with a face carved in lines of experience. My mother immediately pounced. "Oh, thank God you're here," she cried. "Our daughter has locked us out of our own family home." I closed my eyes. "Here we go." Officer Kemp, the sandy-haired one, held up a calm hand. "Ma'am, let's slow down. We're here because the homeowner reported trespassing." My mother's voice shot up an octave. "She is not the homeowner. This is family property. Rowan chimed in, her anger spilling over. She's always been selfish, officer. Always. We've lived with her before. They had never lived with me. Not once. And the idea that lies could slide so easily off Rowan's tongue made my stomach twist. Officer Kemp glanced toward the house. Is the homeowner inside? I opened the front door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it behind my eyes, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I am. Silence hit the porch like a dropped stone. My mother turned toward me, eyes wide with fury rather than embarrassment. Alara, stop this nonsense right now. But Officer Kemp stepped between us. Ma'am, I need you to let her speak. I stepped forward, holding a folder of documents against my chest like a shield. This is my house, I said clearly. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. The insurance is in my name. I did not give anyone permission to move in. I handed the officer my paperwork. He studied it carefully. Rowan huffed. She's lying. Mom helped her buy this house. That makes it ours too. Officer Kemp looked up. Did you contribute financially to the purchase? My mother lifted her chin. We gave her money. A loan. A generous one. $2,500, I said. 3 years before the purchase. And it was explicitly called a gift. My mother's face turned crimson. That is not how I remember it. Officer Kemp didn't flinch. Ma'am, even if it were a loan, that would not give you legal claim to the property. He turned to me. And these documents confirm you're the sole owner. He handed them back. Then he faced my family, the trio of people who had dictated my life since childhood. This is not your residence, he said firmly. You have no right to move into this property without the owner's consent. You could have heard the ocean breathing behind the marsh, it got so quiet. Rowan's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't believe this script wasn't playing out the way she'd rehearsed it. But where are we supposed to go? She cried, shifting instantly into victim mode. My kids were excited. We told them they were living here. The older officer, Officer Daniels, stepped forward now, voice firm but not unkind. Ma'am, you cannot move into someone else's property because you told your children a story. My mother looked like she might actually combust. She is our daughter, she shrieked, jabbing a finger in my direction. Family doesn't treat each other this way. Officer Daniels didn't blink. Family also doesn't attempt to claim property they don't own. That was the moment my mother realized they weren't taking her side. And she snapped. You ungrateful girl, she spat at me. After everything we've done for you? A lifetime of memories hit me at once. Every guilt trip, every manipulation, every time they took until I had nothing left to give. I squared my shoulders. The only thing I'm guilty of, I said quietly, is finally telling you no. Officer Kemp turned to them, voice crisp. Ma'am, sir, ma'am, this is your final warning. You need to leave the property right now. If you return without the owner's permission, you can and will be arrested for trespassing. My father's shoulders sagged. He knew it was over. But Rowan glared at me like she wanted to set me on fire. You're going to regret this, she hissed. You're cutting us out. You're abandoning your own family. For once, I said, I'm choosing myself. The officers escorted them back to their vehicles. The moving truck pulled away, still full of Rowan's boxes. My mother and Rowan sped off next, both of them shouting things I couldn't hear, and didn't need to. My father lingered a moment, staring at me through his truck window. Not with hatred. Not even with anger. But with something far worse. Disappointment. As though loving myself was a betrayal. Then he left too. And just like that, the driveway was empty. Silent. Finally mine again. The officers checked in with me, took a brief statement, and reminded me I could pursue a formal trespassing order if I wanted further protection. Take them. They drove off. And then I stood alone in the doorway of my home. My sanctuary. My refuge. And for the first time in my life, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain. Not fear. Freedom. Real, unfiltered freedom. But peace. Well, peace wasn't coming yet. Because when families like mine lose control, they don't retreat. They escalate. And I had no idea how much darker it was going to get before the light finally returned. The showdown on my porch was the explosion. The weeks that followed were the fallout. The radioactive kind, the kind that seeps into everything. The kind that shows you just how far people will go. When they realize they no longer own you. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the moving truck, the screaming, the police intervention, that was the climax. But it wasn't. It was only the prologue. To the part of the story where the people who raised me stopped pretending to be a family and became something else entirely. An opposition. A force. A threat. It began the following Wednesday. I was at work, halfway through editing a quarterly budget spreadsheet, when my desk phone rang. Not my cell. My desk phone. Which meant someone had taken the extra step to find my office number. I answered automatically, expecting a vendor. "Hello, this is Alara." A woman's voice, calm and official, replied. "Ms. Quinn, this is Officer Patricia from Charleston County Child Protective Services. Do you have a moment to speak?" My heart dropped straight into my stomach. "Child Protective Services?" I repeated. "Yes. We received a report regarding 2 minors, Rowan Elliston's children. The report alleges that you forced them into homelessness and created an unsafe environment." For a moment I couldn't speak. The room felt too bright, too loud, too unreal. I did what? Finally managed. "We just need your version of events, Miss Quinn." So I told her. Everything. The moving truck. The attempted takeover. The police intervention. That Rowan and the kids had never lived with me. Not for one day of their lives. Officer Patricia asked questions, neutral but thorough. When I finished, she exhaled softly. "Based on what you've shared, this appears to be a family dispute rather than a child welfare issue. The children have stable housing with your parents, yes?" "Yes," I said. "They live with my parents. They always have." "Then I'll mark this as unfounded for now. But I need you to be aware. If we receive additional reports, we are obligated to investigate." "Meaning, someone can just keep calling?" "We do take false reports seriously. If a pattern emerges, there can be consequences for the caller." She paused. "You seem like someone who's dealing with a difficult family situation." "I'm sorry." Her voice softened just enough to make something inside me ache. After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the wall. They had used her children against me. Filed a false report. Tried to weaponize government agencies to scare me back into compliance. I shouldn't have been shocked. But I was. Because this was a line I didn't even think they'd consider crossing. And they didn't just cross it. They sprinted over it. 2 days later, the next hit came. I was working in my small home office overlooking the marsh, when I heard gravel crunching in my driveway. Not fast. Not aggressive. Slow. Deliberate. I looked out the window. It was my father. Alone. He got out of the truck, walked to the porch and knocked. Not loud. Not demanding. Just insistent. "Alara," he said. "It's Dad. Can we talk?" I didn't open the door. "Dad, I don't think that's a good idea." He sighed. "Your mother hasn't slept in days. She's devastated. She's angry she didn't get what she wanted," I said. "Not devastated." He ignored that. "You need to apologize," he said gently. "This has gone too far." Apologize. The word hit me like a slap. I'm not opening my home to Rowan and the boys, Dad. I'm not sacrificing everything I've worked for. He exhaled sharply. Rowan needs help. She needs accountability, I countered. She has for years. That's not fair, he snapped. You've always been the independent one. You don't need anything. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Because in his mind, someone who doesn't need anything, doesn't deserve anything. Not space. Not boundaries. Not respect. Please leave, I said quietly. He hesitated. Then he delivered the line that would stay with me for months. Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you've become. Something in me broke cleanly like a snapped bone. Get off my property, I said. Now. He left. And for the first time since childhood, I didn't cry after an encounter with him. I burned. The next week was quiet. Suspiciously quiet. Until a text came from my neighbor Margot. Someone is trying to get into your backyard. I called the police. Come home. My entire body went cold. I sped home faster than I should have, hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived, a cruiser was parked by my back fence. An officer showed me the damage. Pry marks on the doorframe. Fresh ones. Looks like someone tried to force it open, he said. Margot emerged from her porch, flustered but firm. "I saw a woman running toward the street," she said. "Dark hair." Couldn't see her face. Dark hair. Rowan had dark hair. My stomach twisted. I told the officer everything. Filled out a formal report. Requested additional patrols. And that night I installed cameras on every corner of my house. Not because I was paranoid, but because I had finally understood something terrifying. My family wasn't trying to guilt me anymore. They were trying to break me. To intimidate me. To make my life harder than walking away from them. They wanted me trapped. Dependent. Silent. Exactly who I used to be. But that version of me was gone. 3 days later my mother escalated again. A letter arrived from an attorney. He was suing me. For the $2,500 she had given me toward the down payment. Calling it a loan. Claiming she was owed repayment plus interest. I laughed when I read it. A hollow, humorless sound. It wasn't about money. It was about reminding me that nothing I had belonged fully to me. Not even my own home. But that's the thing about people who spend their lives controlling you. They forget what you're capable of. When you finally stop trying to earn their approval. So I hired an attorney. A bulldog named Gregory who specialized in property disputes and messy family conflicts. When he read the lawsuit he snorted. "This is weak," he said. "And petty. We'll dismantle it." And we did. We proved the money was a gift. Text messages. Bank records. Even a sympathy card my mother had written me, calling it, "a little something to help you start fresh." The lawsuit collapsed fast. But I wasn't done. Gregory helped me draft a counter-demand. A formal no-contact agreement. Preventing my mother, father, or sister from calling me, visiting me, or harassing me in any form. They refused, of course. "We handle things within the family," their attorney argued. Except they hadn't handled anything within the family. They'd involved the police. Child Protective Services. An attempted break-in. A lawsuit. So we proceeded with the next step. A restraining order. My family wanted war? Fine. I was done playing defense. The hearing was 6 weeks later. A small, fluorescent-lit courtroom in downtown Charleston. I sat on one side with Gregory. My parents and Rowan sat on the other with their attorney. My mother cried. My father looked hollow. Rowan glared at me with theatrical hatred. The judge reviewed every piece of evidence. Every report. Every document. Every message. Every attempt at entering my property. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm but unequivocal. "Given the pattern of behavior presented, I am granting the restraining order. All 3 respondents must stay 500 feet away from Ms. Quinn and refrain from all contact." My mother sobbed like someone had died. Rowan muttered a curse under her breath. My father stared at the table, ashamed or angry, I couldn't tell. But me. I exhaled a breath I'd been holding for 32 years. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just felt relief, quiet, clean. For the first time, my boundaries didn't just exist in my head. They existed in the law. My safety wasn't optional anymore. It wasn't negotiable. It wasn't a debate. It was real. And legally protected. That night I sat on my porch, listening to the wind move through the marsh reeds. The world felt still. In a way it hadn't felt since I was a child. I had survived the ugliest version of the people I loved. And I had won. But the strangest part? It didn't feel like victory over them. It felt like a victory over the parts of myself that used to believe I owed them everything. Those parts were gone now. And something new was taking their place. Someone new. Someone whole. You'd think that after a war, a real emotional bone-deep war, the silence that follows would feel peaceful. But the truth is, the first kind of silence you get, after escaping your family's control, doesn't feel like peace. Feels like standing in an empty room, after an earthquake, waiting to see if the walls will fall again. 4 weeks after the restraining order was granted, I flinched at every knock on the door, every unfamiliar phone number, every engine that slowed outside my house. Hypervigilance isn't something you shed overnight. It lives in your muscles, your breath, your instincts, long after the threat is gone. But eventually, almost without me realizing it, the silence began to shift. It softened. It warmed. It became something I had never truly known before. My life. Uninterrupted. Unclaimed. My mornings changed first. Instead of waking with dread, checking my phone for guilt-soaked messages, bracing for the next crisis, I woke to the sound of the marsh. Egrets calling. Water lapping. The soft hum of cicadas. I'd make coffee barefoot, open all my windows, and feel the ocean breeze slip into the kitchen. Like a quiet reassurance. You're safe now. The absence of chaos was a detox. I hadn't realized my body needed. No sudden demands. No emotional emergencies. No manipulation disguised as concern. Just the rhythm of my own days. My own choices. My own space. A space no one could invade anymore. Around the third week, people at work started to notice something was different. My coworker Denise, the one who had brought me coffee the Monday after the attempted move-in, stopped by my desk one morning. "You're glowing," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Did you fall in love or win the lottery?" I laughed. A real laugh. One that didn't feel forced or apologetic. "No," I said. "I just stopped giving my entire soul to people who didn't deserve it." Denise raised her coffee cup in a toast. "Cheers to that." It was the first time I realized that healing doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's simply the ability to breathe without explaining yourself. A month into the silence, I invited Denise over for a weekend. Just one friend. One person I trusted. A first step into the world where my home wasn't a fortress or a battleground, but a place meant to be enjoyed. We cooked shrimp and grits, sat on the porch with wine, and watched the sun melt into the water. "You know," she said, leaning back, "I've never seen you this calm. I've never been this calm." It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a truth I felt echoing in my bones. Peace wasn't loud or triumphant. It wasn't a victory parade. It was quiet. The kind of quiet I used to fear. The kind of quiet I now cherished. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts. For the first time in your life. Then came the conversation with my neighbor Margot. She knocked on my door one morning carrying a plate of muffins. "Figured I owed you these after all that mess," she said. We sat on the porch, watching a heron glide over the water. And she told me what she'd heard. Through the island's ever-efficient gossip chain. My father had taken early retirement. Stress, financial strain, embarrassment. My mother had stopped attending her weekly social club. Apparently she couldn't stand the whispers. And Rowan, they finally told her to get her own place, Margot said, taking a sip of sweet tea. Gave her 6 months. I blinked. My parents gave Rowan a timeline? A deadline? It sounded like a rumor from an alternate universe. And the kids? I asked quietly. They're adjusting. Kids always adjust. Rowan's looking at apartments near Beaufort. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. What I felt was distance. Healthy distance. For once, their lives were not my responsibility. Margot patted my hand. "You know, Alara, I think you forced them all to face the real world. Maybe for the first time." I stared out at the marsh, golden in the morning sun. "Maybe," I said. But internally I knew the truth. Whether they grew or didn't grow was no longer my burden to carry. For the first time in my life, I had put the weight down. As spring turned into summer, I threw myself into reclaiming my home. I repainted the guest bedroom a peaceful sage green. Installed new shelving in the hallway. Built a small deck extension where I could stretch out in a lounge chair. And watch the tide roll in. Each project felt like rewriting the history of the house. Erasing the invasion. Reclaiming the space molecule by molecule. My home no longer felt like a place under siege. It felt like a place that held me. Protected me. Reflected me. And the more I built, the more I realized something profound. I wasn't just rebuilding my house. I was rebuilding myself. Not the version shaped by guilt. Not the version trained to serve. Not the version afraid to disappoint. But the version who knew what she needed. And wasn't afraid to defend it. A woman who didn't apologize for her boundaries. A woman who didn't collapse under pressure. A woman who didn't mistake compliance for love. I was becoming her. Fully. Steadily. Beautifully. On my 33rd birthday, I hosted a small gathering on that new deck. Just Denise, a few coworkers, and Margot with her famous lemon bars. We grilled seafood. We laughed. We watched dolphins in the distance. We celebrated simply existing. When the sun dipped below the marsh, casting the water in shades of fire and honey. I found myself standing alone at the railing, listening to the sounds of my life, my new life, settle around me like a warm blanket. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the future. I felt excited. Home. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was sacred. A place where I could hear the woman I'd become. And the woman I was still growing into. A woman who knew finally and fully. My peace is not a luxury. It is not a negotiation. It is not optional. It is mine. And I will never let anyone take it from me again. A year after everything happened, I took a walk along the shoreline at sunset. The sky stretched wide and brilliant over the marsh. Lavender bleeding into gold. Gold melting into rose. The kind of sky that makes you feel both infinitely small and profoundly protected. I walked slowly, letting the cool sand shift under my feet, listening to the hush of the tide rolling in and out. Steady, ancient, indifferent to human chaos. And as the sunlight thinned over the water, I realized something. I couldn't remember the last time I had thought about my family. With anger. Not because what they did didn't matter. It did. It mattered in ways I'm still unraveling. But the anger had stopped being the center of the story. The pain had stopped being the anchor. The fear had stopped being the narrator. Somewhere along the way, quietly, gently, I had stepped into a different version of my life. A version where their chaos wasn't my responsibility. Where their expectations weren't my obligation. Where their disappointment wasn't my identity. A version where I existed. For myself. There's something people don't tell you about walking away from dysfunction. You don't feel victorious at first. You feel empty. Hollow. Like a house that's been cleared of furniture. Quiet, echoing, unfamiliar. But slowly, that hollow space fills with something else. Light. Opinion. Desire. Choice. Self-respect. And then one day you wake up and realize the space isn't hollow anymore. It's whole. After the restraining order, my family splintered under the weight of their own consequences. I didn't watch it happen directly. I wasn't there for the fights, the money troubles, the tense conversations behind closed doors. But small pieces of information drifted to me, like messages in bottles carried by the island breeze. My father's early retirement. My mother's social withdrawal. Rowan's struggle to hold down a job. The financial strain they'd hidden for years finally catching up. For most of my life, I would have felt responsible, guilty, panicked, because I was raised to believe that my job was to hold the family together, no matter the cost to myself. But now I understood something I should have learned decades earlier. Someone else's consequences are not your burden to carry. And for the first time, I let their lives unfold, without inserting myself into the wreckage. It wasn't revenge. Not the kind I had imagined when the war first began. It was something purer. Something quieter. Something that, ironically, looked nothing like vengeance at all. It was freedom. I spent the next year rebuilding my home. And even more deliberately rebuilding myself. I painted walls. Hung art I loved. Added plants. Cooked meals with friends. Walked barefoot on the morning damp porch. With a cup of coffee that tasted like a fresh start. I took up running along the shoreline. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned for lack of time. Sketching, gardening, reading thrillers. I even started dating again. Casually at first. Then with more intention. But the biggest change was the simplest. I no longer lived my life waiting for the next emotional fire to erupt. There were no explosions. No emergency texts. No guilt bombs waiting to detonate in my inbox. Just days. Long quiet days. That belonged entirely to me. The peace didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned. It felt rooted. It felt like home. And here's the truth I didn't expect. The real revenge wasn't cutting them off, or going to court, or proving them wrong in front of a judge. The real revenge was realizing I no longer needed their approval. That the girl who once believed her worth came from being agreeable, full, available, spendable, had grown into a woman who recognized her own value without anyone else's permission. A woman who set boundaries and knew how to enforce them. A woman who chose herself without apology. A woman who rebuilt her life, not out of spite, but out of love. For the first time, directed inward. A woman who understood finally. Self-respect is the most powerful revenge there is. Later that night, as I swept sand off the porch, I paused to watch the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The cottage behind me glowed softly, warm lamplight spilling through the windows, illuminating the home I had fought for. With every ounce of strength I didn't know I had. Somewhere far away, my family was still living with the fallout of their own choices. But their story was no longer mine to narrate. Mine was just beginning. I leaned on the porch railing, feeling the hushed symphony of the marsh settle around me, and smiled. A quiet, honest smile. Because for the first time, I knew exactly who I was. A woman who protected what was hers. A woman who chose peace over guilt. A woman who stopped apologizing for refusing to be used. A woman who stood up for herself and never backed down again. And if you've listened to my story this far, if any part of it felt familiar, if you've ever fought a war that no one else could see, if you've ever learned the hard way that family doesn't give anyone the right to break you, then stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more truths to share, more women learning to choose themselves. So if you want to hear more confessions like this, more real experiences, more voices reclaiming their power, make sure you subscribe to my channel, Confessions with Amy. There's so much more to say, and I'm just getting started.